7. Elko County, Nevada. Ernie Block broke all the speed limits on the drive back from Elko to the Tranquility Motel. The last time he had driven so fast and recklessly had been on a gloomy Monday morning during his hitch with Marine Intelligence in Vietnam. He had been behind the wheel of a Jeep passing through what should have been friendly territory and had unexpectedly come under enemy fire. The incoming shells had spewed up geysers of dirt and chunks of macadam only feet away from his front and rear bumpers. By the time he had broken out of the fire zone, he'd escaped more than 20 near misses, had been hit by 3 small but painfully jagged pieces of mortar, had been rendered temporarily deaf from the thunderous explosions, and had found himself struggling to control a Jeep that was running on its wheel rims with 4 flat tires. Having survived, he figured he had known fear as profound as it could ever be. But coming back from Elko, his fear was building toward a new peak. Nightfall was approaching. He had driven to the Elko freight office in the Dodge van to take delivery of a shipment of lighting fixtures for the motel. He had set out shortly after noon, leaving Faye in charge of the front desk, giving himself plenty of time to make the round trip before twilight. But he had a flat tire and lost time changing it. Then, once he reached Elko, he wasted almost an hour having the tire repaired because he had not wanted to start home without a spare. With one thing or another, he had left Elko almost 2 hours later than expected, and the sun had westered to the far edge of the Great Basin. He kept the accelerator most of the way to the floor, whipping around other traffic on the superhighway. He did not think he would be able to finish the drive home if he had to do it in full darkness. In the morning, they would find him behind the wheel of the van, still parked along the roadside, stark-raving mad from having spent long hours in horrified contemplation of the perfectly black landscape. In the 2.5 weeks since Thanksgiving, he had continued to conceal his irrational fear of darkness from Faye. After she returned from her visit to Wisconsin, Ernie found it more difficult to sleep without a lamp burning, having indulged himself with a nightlight while she was gone. Every morning he used murine to clear his bloodshot eyes. Fortunately, she had not suggested going into Elko at night for a movie, so Ernie had not been required to make excuses. A few times after sunset, he'd had to go from the office to the Tranquility Grill next door, and even though the walk was well lighted by the motel's outdoor lamps and signs, he had been nearly overwhelmed by a sense of fragility, vulnerability. But he had kept his secret. All his life in the Marine Corps and out of it, to the best of his ability, Ernie Block had done what was required of him, all that could be expected, and now, by God, he was not going to fail his own wife. Behind the wheel of the Dodge van, racing westward toward the Tranquility Motel, under a smeary orange-purple sky, Ernie Block wondered if his problem was premature senility, Alzheimer's disease. Even though he was only 52, it almost had to be something like Alzheimer's. Although it frightened him, at least he could understand it. Understand it, yes, but he could not accept it. Faye depended on him. He could not become a mental invalid, a burden on her. The men in the Block family never let their women folk down. Never. Unthinkable. The highway rounded a small hillock, and a mile ahead, north of the interstate, lay the motel, the only building in the vast panorama. Its blue and green neon sign was already switched on, shining fiercely bright against the twilight sky. He'd never seen a more welcome sight. Complete darkness was still 10 minutes away, and he decided it was foolish to risk being stopped by a cop when he was this close to sanctuary. He eased up on the accelerator, and the speedometer needle swiftly dropped. 90, 85, 75, 60. He was 3/4 of a mile from home when a curious thing happened. He glanced southward, away from the road, and his breath caught. He did not know what startled him, something about the landscape, Something about the way the light and shadow played across those downsloping fields. He was suddenly gripped by the odd idea that a particular piece of ground, a half-mile ahead on the opposite side of the highway, was of supreme importance in understanding the bizarre changes that had been taking place in him during the past few months. 50, 45, 40. He could see nothing to make that piece of land different from the tens of thousands of acres around it. Besides, he had seen it countless times before and had been unimpressed by it. Nevertheless, in the slope of the terrain, in the gently folded contours of the earth, in the bisecting wound of an arroyo, in the configuration of sagebrush and grass, and in the scattered, gnarled outcroppings of rock, something seemed to cry out for investigation. He felt as if the land itself were saying, "Here, here, here is part of the answer to your problem, part of the explanation for your fear of the night. Here, here." But that was ridiculous. To his surprise, he found himself pulling to the shoulder of the highway, stopping a quarter-mile from home, not far from the exit ramp to the county road that led past the motel. He squinted south across the highway at the place that had mysteriously captured his attention. He was gripped by the most amazing sense of impending epiphany, an overwhelming feeling that something of monumental importance was about to happen to him. The skin prickled along the back of his neck. He got out of the van, leaving it idling behind him. In a state of tremulous expectation that he could not understand, he headed toward the far side of the interstate, where he could have a better look at the plot of ground that fascinated him. He traversed 2 lanes of blacktop, clambered into the 20-foot wide gully that divided the halves of the interstate, and scrambled up the far slope. He waited for 3 huge trucks to roar past, then crossed the eastbound lanes in the windy wake of those rigs. His heart was pounding with an inexplicable excitement, and for the moment he had forgotten the advent of night. He stopped on the far berm at the crest of the highway's elevated bed, looking south and slightly west. He wore a bulky suede jacket with sheepskin lining, but his brush-cut gray hair provided little protection from the chilly wind, which scrubbed its cold knuckles across his skull. He began to lose the feeling that something of immense importance was about to happen. Instead, he was seized by the even creepier notion that something had already happened to him on that patch of shadow-banded ground out there, something that accounted for his recent fear of the dark, something he had assiduously banned from his memory. But that made no sense. If important events had transpired here, they simply would not have slipped his mind. He was not forgetful, and he was not the kind of person who repressed unpleasant memories. Still, the back of his neck continued to tingle. Out there, not far into those trackless Nevada plains, something had happened to him that he had forgotten, but that now pricked him from his subconscious, where it was deeply embedded, much the way a needle, accidentally left in a quilt, might jab and startle a sleeper out of a dream. With his legs spread wide and his feet planted firmly in the berm, with his blocky head hunched down on his blocky shoulders, Ernie seemed to be challenging the landscape to speak more clearly to him. He strained to resurrect the dead memory of this place, if indeed there was one, but the harder he tried to grasp the elusive revelation, the faster it receded from him. Then it was gone altogether. The déjà vu deserted him as completely as the sense of impending epiphany had evaporated before it. The tingle left his scalp and neck. His frantically pounding heart settled slowly into a more normal pace. Bewildered and somewhat dizzy, he studied the fast-fading scene before him. The angled land, the spines and teeth of rock, the brush and grass, the weathered convexities and concavities of the ancient earth. And now he could not imagine why it had seemed special to him. It was just a portion of the high plains virtually indistinguishable from 1,000 other spots from here to Elko or from here to Battle Mountain. Disoriented by the suddenness of his plunge from the brink of transcendent awareness, he looked back toward the van, which waited on the north side of the interstate. He felt conspicuous and foolish when he thought of the way he had dashed from there to here in the grip of a strange excitement. He hoped Faye had not seen him. If by chance she had been looking out a window in this direction, she could not have missed his performance, for the motel was only a quarter of a mile away, and the flashing emergency blinkers on the truck made it by far the most noticeable thing in the swiftly descending darkness. Darkness. Abruptly, the nearness of nightfall hit Ernie Block hard. For a while, the mysterious magnetism that had drawn him to this place had been stronger than his fear of the dark, but that changed in an instant when he realized that the eastern half of the sky was purple-black, and that only minutes of vague light remained in the western realm. With a cry of panic, he bolted across the eastbound lanes, in front of a motorhome, oblivious of the danger. A horn blared at him. He did not care, did not pause, just ran pell-mell, because he could feel the darkness clutching at him and pressing down on him. He reached a shallow gully that served as a lane divider, fell as he started down into it, rolled back onto his feet, terrified of the blackness that was welling up out of each depression in the land and from under every rock. He flung himself up the other side of the gully, fled into the westbound lanes. Fortunately, there was no oncoming traffic, for he did not look to see if the way was clear. At the van, he fumbled with the door handle, acutely conscious of the perfect blackness under the truck. It was grappling at his feet. It wanted to pull him under the Dodge and devour him. He yanked the door open, tore his feet loose of the hands of darkness, clambered into the cab, slammed the door, locked it. He felt better, but far from safe, and if he had not been so close to home, he would have frozen stiff. But he only had a quarter of a mile to go, and when he switched on his headlights, the gloom fell back, which encouraged him. He was shaking so violently that he did not trust himself to pull back into traffic, so he drove along the shoulder of the interstate until he came to the exit ramp. There were sodium arc lamps along the ramp and at the base of it, and he was tempted to stop there at the bottom in the yellow glare, but he gritted his teeth and turned onto the county road out of the light. After driving only 200 yards, Ernie reached the entrance to the Tranquility Motel. He swung through the parking area, slid the van into a slot in front of the office, switched off the headlights, and cut the engine. Beyond the big windows of the office, he could see Faye at the front desk. He hurried inside, closing the door behind himself with too much force. He smiled at Faye when she glanced up, and he hoped the smile looked more convincing than it felt. "I was beginning to worry, dear," she said, returning his smile. "Had a flat tire," Ernie said, unzipping his jacket. He felt somewhat relieved. Nightfall was easier to accept when he was not alone. Faye gave him strength, but he was still uneasy. She said, "I missed you." "I was only gone the afternoon." "I guess I'm hooked then. Seem longer. Guess I've got to have my Ernie fix every couple hours or go through withdrawal symptoms." He leaned across the counter, and she leaned from her side, and they kissed. There was nothing half-hearted about their kiss. She put one hand to his head to hold him close. Most long-married couples, even if they remained in love, were perfunctory in their displays of affection, but that was not the case with Ernie and Faye Block. After 31 years of marriage, she could still make him feel young. She said, "Where are the new lighting fixtures? They did come in, didn't they? The freight office didn't make a mistake?" That question jolted him back to an acute awareness of the night outside. He glanced at the windows and quickly away. No. I'm tired. I don't really feel up to hauling them in here tonight." "Just 4 crates. Really, I'd rather do it in the morning," he said, striving to keep a tremor out of his voice. "The stuff will be all right in the truck. Nobody will touch it." "Hey, you put up the Christmas decorations." "You mean you just noticed?" A huge wreath of pine cones and nuts hung on the wall above the sofa. A life-size cardboard figure of Santa Claus stood in the corner beside the rack of postcards, and a small ceramic sleigh with ceramic reindeer was displayed at one end of the long counter. Red and gold Christmas tree balls hung from the ceiling light fixture on lengths of transparent fishing line. You had to get up on a ladder for some of this, he said. Just the step ladder. But what if you'd fallen? You should have left this for me to do. Faye shook her head. Honey, I swear to God I'm not the fragile type. Now hush up. You ex-Marines carry macho too far sometimes. Is that so? The outer door opened and a trucker came in asking about a room. Ernie held his breath until the door closed. The trucker was a lanky man in a cowboy hat, denim jacket, cowboy shirt, and jeans. Faye complimented him on the hat, which had an elaborately sculpted leather band brightened with chips of turquoise. In that easy way of hers, she made the stranger feel like an old friend as she shepherded him through the check-in process. Leaving her to it, trying to forget his curious experience on the interstate, trying not to dwell on the night that had come, Ernie moved behind the counter, hung his coat on the brass rack in the corner by the file cabinets, and went to the oak desk where mail was stacked on the blotter. Bills, of course, advertisements, a charity solicitation, the first Christmas cards of the year, his military pension check. Finally, there was a white envelope without a return address, which contained only a Polaroid color photograph that had been taken in front of the motel beside the door to room 9. It was of 3 people, man, woman, child. The man was in his late 20s, darkly tanned and good-looking. The woman was a couple of years younger, a pretty brunette. The little girl, 5 or 6, was very cute. All 3 were smiling at the camera. Judging from their clothes, shorts and t-shirts, and the quality of sunlight in the picture, Ernie assumed that the snapshot had been taken in the middle of summer. Puzzled, he turned the photo over, looking for a scribbled note of explanation. The back was blank. He checked the envelope again, but it was empty. No letter, no card, not even a business card to identify the sender. The postmark was Elko, December 7th, last Saturday. He looked again at the people in the picture, and although he did not remember them, he felt his skin prickle just as it had done when he had been drawn to that place along the highway. His pulse accelerated. He quickly put the picture aside and looked away from it. Faye was still chatting with the cowboy trucker as she took her room key off the pegboard and passed it across the counter. Ernie kept his eyes on her. She was a calming influence. She had been a lovely farm girl when he'd met her, and had grown into a lovelier woman. Her blonde hair might have begun to turn white, but it was hard to tell. Her blue eyes were clear and quick. Hers was an open, friendly Iowa face, slightly saucy, but always wholesome, even beatific. By the time the cowboy trucker left, Ernie had stopped shaking. He took the Polaroid snapshot to Faye. What do you make of this? That's our room 9, she said. They must have stayed with us. She frowned at the young couple and little girl in the photograph. Can't say I remember them, though. Strangers to me. So why would they send us a photo without a note? Well, obviously they thought we would remember them. But the only reason they'd think that was if maybe they stayed for a few days and we got to know them. But I don't know them at all. I think I'd remember the tyke, Ernie said. He liked children. They usually liked him. She's cute enough to be in movies. I think you'd remember the mother. She's gorgeous. Postmarked Elko, Ernie said. Why would anybody who lives in Elko come out here to stay? Maybe they don't live in Elko. Maybe they were here last summer and always meant to send us a photo. And maybe they recently passed through and meant to stop and leave this off but didn't have time, so they mailed it from Elko. Without a note. It is odd, Faye agreed. He took the picture from her. Besides, this is a Polaroid, developed a minute after it was taken. If they wanted us to have it, why didn't they leave it with us when they stayed here? The door opened and a curly-haired guy with a bushy mustache came into the office shivering. Got any rooms left? He asked. While Faye dealt with the guests, Ernie took the Polaroid back to the oak desk. He meant to gather up the mail and go upstairs, but He stood by the desk, studying the faces of the people in the snapshot. It was Tuesday evening, December 10th.